Anti-heroes have an unspoken charm to them. They often do things that are against a pure hero's moral code, but at the same time, they know better than to embrace a path of senseless violence, one that could paint them as mere by-the-book villains. The hybridity of anti-heroes and their thought patterns makes them a fascinating subject for deconstruction, which often leads to such characters becoming fan favorites in a given franchise. This naturally brings us to RGG Studios' take on the concept, which culminated in the legacy behind the legendary Goro Majima. Assuming everything was scheduled accordingly, today should be Majima's 60th birthday. So instead of adding yet another analysis of his mainline iteration to this platform, I decided on covering arguably the most complete iteration of Majima's character. More specifically, his Ishin counterpart, Okita Soji. Surprisingly, this version of Majima went through an all-encompassing character arc within the span of a single game, and it covers all of the defining aspects that elevated the Mad Dog's writing through his near 20 years in the mainline entries. More importantly than that though, by looking into the logic behind Okita's writing and comparing it to Majima's current place in the series, we can actually see a glimpse into what RGG could do with the character in a world post-Infinite Wealth. So let's take a brief look at this collection of parallels and how it transformed Okita from being a villain to being an anti-hero to eventually becoming our brother figure. Much like the story of the Mad Dog himself, the story of Okita Soji is not a simple one, but rather than going over his legacy in exhaustive detail, we'll instead focus on his defining moments that led to the individual's growth and development. There are three eras of the character to take note of: the era of wandering, the era of rivalry, and the era of brotherhood. In the beginning, the man we now know as Okita was a mere ronin whose entire world revolved around his mentor Kamo and brother figure Jusuke. Their history as assassins made it hard to find a place to call home, though they'd eventually be invited into a group of swordsmen led by Kondo Isami. All was well for the time, but eventually there was an attack executed on this trio, and this internal schism led to the deaths of three swordsmen, Inoue, Nagakura, and Okita. These three would then become the new identities that Kamo, Jusuke, and Goro would have to carry for the remainder of their days, and the bloodshed that transpired from this venture led to the birth of the Shinsengumi. This era of wandering already shows us two important character traits behind Goro: his unwavering loyalty to his two brethren and his history of bloodshed as an assassin. It also does a fine job at creating a mask that the character would have to carry for much of his life, akin to the Mad Dog persona for Majima in the main lines. The fine thing is that we don't know that the legacy of Okita Soji is technically a mask upon first meeting him. We just think of this man as a loose cannon, comparable to Majima in the first Yakuza game. Both characters are territorial and bloodthirsty, with the latter of these tendencies being apparent from even a mere look at Okita's crimson-soaked attire. Hell, without the associated backstory, you could honestly see this interaction at the headquarters as just an average setup for some classic Majima shenanigans, where he'd seek to entertain himself before anything else. But with the necessary context and how the Shinsengumi know about Ryoma's true intentions behind joining the group, this clash of swords becomes much more important than a standard boss fight. See, the Shinsengumi have a secret plan in the works that could be nigh impossible to fulfill, meaning that they'd need all the help they could get. But at the same time, Ryoma specifically joined this group to find the person that killed his father figure, and since the assailant in question is none other than Kamo, this puts Okita in a unique position. Since Ryoma could in equal parts be an asset to the Shinsengumi and a threat to his mentor, Okita decides to test Ryoma's abilities via a quick show of force. We know he wasn't going all out at this point in time, but seeing as this first fight ended in a draw, this meant Okita would have to keep an eye on Ryoma from now on. And so begins the era of rivalry. In the midst of this, Ryoma slowly crosses people off from his personal list of suspects, while Okita causes his signature mayhem in the background. Again, classic Yakuza shenanigans, but with some different names being used. However, if Ishin's iteration of Majima was a mere one-for-one retelling of the mainline dynamic, there'd be no point in calling Okita a redefined Majima in the first place. And this is where things get really fun. One part of the Kiryu-Majima dynamic that's been sorely missing for some fans is the explanation of what happened between Yakuza 0 and Kiwami. How these two guys went from being implied by the book rivals to later becoming brother figures who respect one another. Ishin gives us a glimpse into how that evolution could have thematically come to be, as we see their dynamic carefully develop for the better part of 6 entire chapters. After Okita challenged Ryoma to a second fight, one that ended both in a draw and a reversal of roles from the first clash, we reach a point where these two could easily become friends. Ryoma realizes Okita wasn't the assailant he was looking for, and Okita could see that this guy wasn't just a rage-fueled madman that would carelessly cut someone down. Frankly, they could have just moved on from this fight as people who finally respected each other's skill and outlook on life. But that would have been too easy, and the bond established so quickly wouldn't have felt warranted if you isolated it from the mainline series. So Ishin decided to up the ante by adding in a tragedy of equal magnitude to the one that started this game's story. Kamo-san, Okita's lifelong mentor, was cowardly struck down by a man claiming to be Sakamoto Ryoma, and the moment this is revealed is when any semblance of Okita's playful side vanishes for a while, replaced by a single word: doubt. Ultimately, it was Okita's choice to go easy on Ryoma in the first fight, even though a potential threat was present. And it was his choice to trust Ryoma after the second fight, as Ryoma refrained from finishing him off. But now that all the signs pointed to these choices being the wrong ones, this left Okita at a defining crossroads. A moment of misplaced trust can either lead you down a path of unrivaled villainy, or a path of forgiveness, after all, which meant that this tragic loss could perhaps allow Okita to undo his current legacy of death. And while it may not seem that way at first, I believe that this was something that Okita longed for quite some time. Instead of using his mentor's demise as an opportunity to drown Kyo in a sea of violence, all for the sake of revenge, he instead acts calmly and deliberately. His demeanor becomes the polar opposite of his mad dog persona, as he patiently searches behind the scenes for the true cause of Kamo's death. Only when he confirmed that someone named Ryoma was truly to blame did Okita lead our protagonist to a secluded spot, and the way he went about it was a quintessential anti-hero move. Okita tries to strike down the real Ryoma in the same way that Kamo was attacked. He emulated his mentor's form of swordsmanship to a T. Hell, even the QTE during this fight is a carbon copy of the one from when we fought Kamo at the beginning of the game. This isn't the case of the meaningless bloodshed that defined Okita up to now. It was an attempt at both honoring Kamo's teachings and trying to move on from the past, which he did. Even if he didn't avenge his mentor just yet, this fight with Ryoma showed that Okita had finally surpassed his dear mentor. Even if we were fully bested by Ryoma, this fight removed any feelings of doubt from the duo, and it definitively painted Ryoma as someone deserving of trust and respect, much like Okita's oldest friends. As far as Ludo narrative goes, this entire exchange is an impeccable show of emotion and gravity. It reframes this version of the Mad Dog to being a man driven by emotion, by extremes, and the desire for peace, just like Ryoma. And this would allow Okita to finally venture into some untreaded territory. See, one of the reasons why I've spent much of this video showing how Okita and Ryoma formed a kinship, despite the title of the video focusing on the concept of anti-heroes, is that Okita's acts of heroism and his acts of brotherly care are one and the same. Think of it this way: both heroes and anti-heroes aspire to achieve noble goals, even if their methods may differ. So how about you put two friends on the same path of heroism and see how they approach the challenges that await? Well, this is the question that Ishin poses as well, and the end results speak for themselves. The first challenge for our heroes to conquer can be seen as soon as Chapter 11 rolls around, where Ryoma does a standard diplomatic plea at the people guarding the Shogun's castle, whereas Okita shoots a cannon at them. The desired end result behind these interjections is the end of class-based inequality all across Japan, and as we've seen all throughout Ishin, Ryoma isn't a man of senseless violence. The Mad Dog, on the other hand, does what needs to be done to reach a desired goal, and this time round, the goal in question is finally a noble one, so our boy becomes a necessary evil should the opportunity call for it. And this isn't a one-sided affair either, cause the way I see it, Ryoma keeps Okita from going fully off the edge, while Okita pushes Ryoma out of his righteous shell if there is no other solution to an issue. It all makes for such a compelling display, so it makes sense why this particular tag team is so omnipresent for the final third of Ishin. Like seriously, Okita accompanies us physically in Chapter 10, during the Teradaya Long Battle, in Chapter 11, as we make our way through the Tokugawa Castle, in Chapter 12, as we fight against Ishin Watase, and nearly the entire finale, which includes 3 major boss fights, alongside 2 other Shinsengumi captains. If you also count the moments where Okita was shown to be present narrative-wise, but not gameplay-wise, he also accompanied us in the Chapter 8 Sengoku Long Battle, and the Chapter 13 Long Battle where we chased the other Sakamoto Ryoma. This means that Okita accompanied us 6 times, and the nature behind nearly every one of these tag team accomplishments is one of just goals that would eventually lead Japan to prosper anew. Not only can you see the differences in the duo's approaches to pursuing this end goal, but by nature of Okita being by our side for this long, this also means that Ryoma had every right to consider him a brother by the end of this game. This moment, when he finally adds the classic Ni-san title, wasn't just a character casually calling you a sworn brother after a brief joining of hands. We've fought with him, we've struggled, and we've overcome anything that came our way, which gives this duo's dynamic a comparable or even greater weight than that of the mainline entries. So this particular moment genuinely feels earned. While Ishin gave us the missing piece for our thematic puzzle, and united these familiar faces in saving countless people from larger-than-life threats yet again, the beauty behind it all is how this version of Majima could only come to be thanks to the PS3 era of the Mad Dog's characterization. It's games like Yakuza 3, 4, Dead Souls, and 5 that humanized our beloved rival, all the while retaining that classic air of mystique that his PS2 iterations thrived on. It's the main reason why Ishin's version of Majima feels so complete, and why it would be great to see this entity influence the mainline entries to seemingly return the favor. Seeing as the Tojo 3 are at a comparable crossroads right now to that of the Shinsengumi boys, there's a number of cues that RGG could take from Ishin's thematic finality that could offer each of their respective legacies a meaningful conclusion. Not one where these characters simply wither away, but one where they shine brighter than ever, just like their historical archetypes did. So, to all of you still watching, please, join me in wishing Majima a very happy birthday. As you may already know, RGG have been quite proactive in making this entire month a loving celebration of everything related to him, so this video was my attempt at contributing to this shared community effort. Plus, considering Yokoyama-san's comments on pitching an Okita-centered spin-off in the past, maybe the subjects covered here become a fun bit of foreshadowing for some future Majima Gaiden games. Definitely not Copium, by the way, perish the thought. Anyway, with all of that said, thank you all for tuning in today, and I hope that this collage of themes made for an enjoyable celebration for everyone involved. So, until next time, take care of yourselves, and have a great day. Cheers!